In the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night, in the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night.
Hello everyone, I'm Anthropomantic Fiend, and I do horror-related things on the internet. Today I am reviewing yet another Lugosi movie. I've kind of figured he'd be back eventually, and here he is. And this one's kind of different because I think this is his only color movie that he ever made, and that is Scared to Death from 1947. This is a movie about a husband and a wife in an old mansion, and they aren't getting along too well. There is a plot to murder her that unfolds, and she dies. That's not a spoiler because the movie's prologue opens up in the morgue looking at her body. The real question is who killed her and how. And there's all kinds of characters and suspects of varying degrees of colorfulness throughout the mansion, and murder mystery whodunitness ensues. And yeah, as I said, this came out in 1947. I think it was based on a play, much like a lot of these movies have been. And once again, it stars Bela Lugosi, but this is kind of a new thing because this is the only color movie he was ever in, I think. This is your only opportunity to legitimately see Lugosi in a movie in color. The only other notable actor in this that I saw was George Zucco, who's been in a bunch of the 1940s mummy movies. He was in Dead Men Walk. He was in, I think, a couple other movies I've reviewed already, but he's kind of this standard actor who you'll see in a lot of these black and white horror movies. Him and Lionel Atwill pop up a lot, and he plays this kind of mysterious, slightly creepy family doctor character, and I really enjoyed him in that because even though his character is not particularly sinister, Zuko kind of brings this thing to him, quite a bit of it just by being George Zuko, where you kind of think that he might be somehow involved in the killing of this woman, and you don't know. George Zuko is just always really fun to watch, so I liked him. The woman in the house kind of comes off as a jerk at first, but she's really kind of obviously unhappy with her situation. She's gone through some awful traumatic stuff. She's done some stuff she's not happy with. She's got some serious demons, and now someone's trying to kill her. So she kind of comes off as just like a jerk at first, but she's got some demons and some issues, and all of the other characters are relatively wholesome, and she's just never happy in this movie, and with good reason. I didn't find her likable at first, but I found her more reasonable, and I liked her performance more than some of the other characters at the end of the day. And her husband just kind of comes off as a jerk from the get-go, and he's honestly barely in this movie. So not much there. And then there's a cop/detective / ex-cop/detective. His name is Bill, and he is maybe my favorite character in the movie, but also very aggravating to watch. He does not have any grasp of what's going on. He's a very sort of dim-witted character. He was actually kicked out of the police force because he could not solve any crimes. So he's just kind of here at this old house hoping that something will eventually happen because there was a death threat. So he's always just sort of talking about, like, you know, no offense to anybody, but I kind of hope that one of you gets knocked off so I can solve your murder and get my job back. And he actually says at one point, all I need is one slightly murdered body and I'm good to go. All the other characters kind of treat him like dirt for this reason, and I honestly feel bad for him. He's not smart at all, but he's kind of adorable for that reason. He just doesn't have any grasp of what's going on. But at the same time, he can't take anything in this movie seriously, even the dark moments. He's kind of spouting these comedic lines constantly. Even when bodies have dropped, he will like be talking to the bodies and spouting all these jokes, and it's just like, he's funny. He's not the funniest thing I've ever seen, but he's funny, and he's my favorite part of the movie. But the dark stuff's happening now, so can you try to take that seriously? So that didn't quite work for me. But I really liked him. He kind of came off like he was just going to be like the background comic relief at first, but he got almost pushed to the forefront of the movie and is by far my favorite part of the film. And there's a lot of back and forth between him and the maid in the house, who's very sort of snarky and sassy, and I enjoyed her character quite a bit. And then of course there's Bela Lugosi, and he's playing Bela Lugosi again, and I can't complain. He's great in this. He's kind of the prime suspect for the murder at first, and I wasn't entirely sure who his character was supposed to be for a while, but you find out that he's like this former magician, and there might be some criminal background with him, but he just comes off like Bela Lugosi, and honestly, he's got connections with the other characters, but I don't really know what they were. I don't really know why he's there, but he's there, and he's Lugosi, so I can't complain. He's also got this character of this midget, or little person, whatever term is politically correct at this point. I don't really know what to say, but there's nothing politically correct about him in the movie, and he's barely in the movie. There's just this character that follows Lugosi around and like steps on somebody's foot at one point and kind of follows him around doing stuff, and I don't even know. Lugosi and his right-hand man's presence in this film are kind of confusing. This whole movie is kind of confusing, and yeah, but Bela Lugosi's in it, so I enjoyed that. There's this reporter character who shows up later who used to know Bill. He's kind of annoying. I don't really care for him. He's kind of like the biggest jerk in the movie. But what's worse is we meet his wife slash girlfriend, and she just is like just this pure caricature. She's extremely ditzy. She doesn't really know what's happening. She's basically Disney's Snow White. She even like sounds like Disney's Snow White. The whole portrayal of her and how the other characters treat her is so sexist, and I hate it so much. It's just, words cannot describe how god-awful and offensive this depiction of her in the movie is. So I kind of hated that. Yeah, that's all the characters. Most of them are honestly somewhat interesting. Some of them are barely in the movie, and some of them just come off, or one of them at least just comes off as a horrible sexist caricature who's treated like garbage, and I kinda hate that. Story-wise, it opens up with these guys about to perform an autopsy on this woman and trying to figure out what could have killed her. But you know, if you're walking into this movie, you've seen the title of the movie, and so you kind of know how she's gonna die, because they're just like, we haven't found any poison in her, and there's no signs of strangulation. What could have killed her? And it's just like, oh, I don't know, maybe she was scared to death, because that's kind of the title of the movie. That's not much of a spoiler, because they kind of give it away anyway, so that doesn't entirely work. And then it did something that was kind of interesting that I didn't expect that could have been cool. The two guys who are there are saying, I've always sort of wondered what the last thoughts that one of these bodies could have been thinking were right before death cut them off. It pans over to the corpse of this woman, and we hear her voice in her head, and we hear like her screaming in her last words, and then it sort of fades into her waking up out of a nightmare as sort of this flashback. And the framing device is the narration of this woman's corpse, which was actually a really cool touch. But they kind of abuse it, because at just really random times in the movie, when no explanation is needed, you'll hear these sort of mystical sound effects, and it'll go back to this woman's lifeless corpse and a little narration of just like, the grip of the killer was getting tighter on me, and then the mystical sound effects, and it'll just fade back into the movie. And this happens like 5 or 6 times, and every time it's like the same mystical sound effects the same shot, a useless piece of information, and the same stuff. It's just the same stock sound effect and the same shot over and over with information that the movie didn't need. So I like the idea of the story being narrated by the corpse of the murdered woman, but they do it in a way that is kind of useless and annoying and takes you out of the movie a little bit. So, good idea, not so good execution. Ample room for psychological horror in this movie because it's clear that there's some demons going on with this woman and that the killer is trying to play on them and is sort of using just very specific things from her past that we don't quite know about to just sort of trigger her fear and her past trauma and to try to literally scare her to death. That element of the movie is cool, but it's barely in the movie. We spend a lot of the movie just going around with the people in the movie, just sort of talking to characters. There's a lot of just goofy comical dialogue and not a lot of horror or even mystery going on. There's a lot of nothing that happens in this movie. And there's this sort of past of this woman that we don't really hear about. There's sort of this thing about a ribbon covering her eyes, which freaks her out, which we don't get revealed what that means, and there's this man in a green mask who will appear in the windows occasionally and peek in. We get no info on who this is supposed to be, and it just plays the same stock horror music every time he appears in the windows. So it's just like, oh my god, this again. And the shots of him in the window honestly feel useless. They don't add anything to the story. And there's a few scares in the movie and some potential murder in there, but you know, there's not much of it. And it's not very well executed. Once we finally do figure out what's been going on in this woman's past, it's really dark, and there's definitely ample room for some good story there, but they just kind of dump it all on you at the very end of the movie, and it's just a total info dump, very last minute and rushed, and you could have been building to this and had a better story, but it's just kind of not there. And I was honestly, with the exception of the ridiculousness that is Bill, who I love, kind of bored throughout this whole movie, even when Lugosi was on screen, because he doesn't really do anything. All in all, this is an okay movie, and it's cool if you want to see Lugosi in color, but it's not really an interesting movie or anything I'm gonna go back to. And that is my whole review of this movie. I don't have any spoilers for you because there's not really anything I wanted to talk about there. So that's my review of Scared to Death. Thank you for watching my video, and hopefully I'll see you in another one. Bye.